Tom, thank you for joining me today. Again, we've all heard about the 2018 Farm Bill and how it kind of, well, indirectly and non intentionally opened the door for THCA, for seed sales, and a whole bunch of other products with a whole bunch of other cannabinoids.
Mhm.
Now, we all know it as a 2018 Farm Bill. What is the name of this new piece of legislation that we're all going to have to play by?
Oh, it doesn't really have a name. Like it has a title of like L something, whatever the number was to reopen the government. But then it amends the Agricultural Marketing Act where the definition of hemp lies. And so that is going to be amended, particularly 1639O. And so the definition of hemp will now have inclusions and exclusions. There's another farm bill draft that's working its way through Congress. That I guess will be the 26th farm bill. It is identical to what they passed to reopen the government back in November of 25. However, it is less specific. And so like all those exclusions and the hemp derived cannabinoid products, those are not in the farm bill draft. That doesn't mean they no longer exist. Quite the opposite. It means that they aren't even going to discuss it because the USDA doesn't think they have the ability to discuss it when in defining what an agricultural commodity is.
So this was kind of, backdoored a little bit in the sense it's not as if we could go and look at, oh, Google Farm Bill 2026 and find it. It sounds like it will make its way there, but it's just reiterating what was passed in the agricultural appropriations bill or whatever it was.
It was part of the agricultural appropriations bill, but then there was that omnibus that reopened the government. Like I don't remember the name of the HR, but
Right.
HR four digits, and you can just Google how did you reopen the government in 2019 in 2025, and what did that do to the definition of hemp?
And let's explore that here real quick. So the old definition was what? What was legally defined as hemp?
Well, there's what it specifically says, and then there's what it began or became. And so, like, what it specifically says is, the hemp plant and everything, all like a pretty large amount of alls, including derivatives, provided that it is Delta 9 THC compliant. They then, and they being the hemp industry, then figured out that they could create semi-synthetic products by taking CBD and turning it through chemistry easily enough. It goes into Delta 8, but you can make it into Delta 9 or any other particular thing. And then they took another jump of legislative interpretation to say like, well, look, if I take these few drops of hemp derived Delta 9 and I put it into this beverage and there's only like, so many milligrams, I can do the math and say that it qualifies as hemp because it's got Delta 9 of 0.3% or less. And I'm like, well, no, actually, that has 100% of Delta 9 in that particular ingredient that goes into the list of the soda. I mean, what you're arguing is like, just sprinkle hemp on uranium and it becomes hemp. Just put hemp in anything like your tea that you drink, put a couple of things of hemp in there, stir it up, it's hemp. It's how that I thought was a really sloppy legal reading. And if I was a judge, I would have been like, no, it says derivative. So you took what, and then you did chemistry and you turned it into a semi-synthetic. The DEA has never said that was hemp. But some judges did, mostly because for the same reason that it was hemp, the judges and also the legislatures have no effing clue about the plant. And so it's just
Right.
bad law. Yeah.
And then, yeah, that's one thing that I see here in my home state of Washington. They're almost being led by the industry, and they really don't have a clue as to what the potential is. When you ban just Delta 9, which was THC, you've left THCA wide open because it wasn't specifically mentioned. So, how does
It
that
was. It
change?
was. It was specifically mentioned in the methodology for testing and also for the methodology for having a hemp cultivation program in your state or in
Mm,
your
okay.
Indian jurisdiction. And as a result, the industry pushed back quite a bit. And so during the rulemaking process, they interpreted that rule to be we will test for total THC compliance no more than 30 days before harvest, which is, laughable because at that time, like the hemp plant or any cannabis plant that's only 4 weeks into flower, you're not harvesting that. It's not ready. Its cannabinoids are not even close. And so then you're going to harvest, that's when you're going to test for THC compliance. I mean, like it's that meme where they're winking and stuff.
Right.
And so like that was worse law done to purportedly protect farmers that were supposed to be, cultivating type 3 cultivars like AC/DC and Trump and the wife and Lifter and cherry wine and all the things that the hemp bill started out with that were a 20-to-1 CBD THC ratio genetic. Well, that ain't what happened. And I kept like advising clients, and it eventually just stopped representing hemp clients, around after COVID, because it was just how do I get around this, or how do I sell that
Right.
without any record keeping? And I'm like, don't. The DEA says no, and you're looking at an enforcement vacuum, and so that
Mm.
enforcement vacuum is kind of snapping shut now, and I think it's going to get a lot worse in the coming months after the definition is in place. I think we could see some federal raids.
I definitely think we will. And one of the, rules, even as the 2018 Farm Bill got signed in, it wasn't automatic for a lot of the players that are in today's THCA or even genetics market, because there was still the source rule. And the source rule came from the DEA. It basically said, hey, if you're growing or if you're selling seeds, right? Seeds have less than 0.03% THC, but they came from a plant that produces more than that. So the source is illegal, therefore you can't necessarily have this. How has that, as far as like seeds and things, or let's just say, how has the percentage definition changed from the old bill to the new bill?
Now they have a total concentration of tetrahydrocannabinols. And so they've created new laws to define what THC means. And the FDA just blew a deadline to assist in understanding what that new law means as to the THCs, the total concentration of and it's not just THC, it's total hydrocannabinols. And they make it plural because there was supposed to be a list of all the ones that get you high, and the FDA was supposed to put that out last week, and they totally blew the deadline. And so
And
that's the
even though,
main definition. That's the main like a textual definition change.
Mhm.
Then what they did is they added a whole bunch of exclusions, and so they added some inclusions, industrial hemp, like when you're growing it clearly for seed or for fiber or to make wood out of it or to make industry out of it. Row crop it, cordage, clothing, all the things that they thought that they were legalizing when they legalized hemp in the 2018 Farm Bill. That's been included. And then there's exclusions. And so they've excluded the seeds. They've excluded hemp derived cannabinoid products. They've excluded, any container that has more than zero point 0.4 milligrams of the total tetrahydrocannabinols in it. And that's another thing the FDA was supposed to get us last week was, how do we define this container? Is it like, if you buy a 6-pack of the beverages, is it the 6-pack or is it like the individual beverage? And
Mm,
so we don't know. We still don't know. Or is it the serving size? But who knows? Yeah.
right. And just because they've missed the deadline, that doesn't, well, for the definitions there, does that mean that this new law is not going to go into effect, or is it on its way regardless?
Yeah. And so a deadline doesn't change the effective date, but it does show more of an enforcement. And so, like, there may be a lack of enforcement in certain aspects of the new definition.
Okay. Well, because this is a show, it's all about breeding and it's all about genetics. Really, seeds is primarily our focus here. So, does it matter that seeds contain less than the legally defined THC limit in the new bill?
No, that's the only time they look at the genetic material. So they look at the genetic material for the definition of seeds in the exclusion section. So if your genetic material will result in a total THC concentration plant of greater than zero point 0.3, then you are not looking at seeds, you're looking at marijuana. And
Okay.
so there's that. And then then you cross check that against the definition of hemp, and it just says the plant and all parts of the plant, and then there's the total THC limitation. So like you do have a clone or a tissue culture loophole just kind of staring you at the face because they define the seeds as an exclusion, provided that it will make the THC, but then they don't define the hemp definition with anything about the genetics of the THC, only the presence of the THC.
And I want to point out for people who are watching the show too, Cannabis Legal News is where you can find Tom every Sunday. And throughout the week, there's a lot of really great videos that you have been putting out, which kind of break this down further. So if anybody's curious and wants to actually go deeper with what we're talking about, Cannabis Legal News, check them out on YouTube. Um, it sounds like we're going back to the source rule, basically. You know, again, the seed doesn't have that much THC, but the plant it came from does, so it's illegal. Um, you know, we've all seen a differentiation between state and federal laws here. Will shipping from one state to the next, like, and we're talking seeds again, we're talking seeds here. Well, maybe clones too. We'll get to that. But will shipping, seeds from one state to the next be considered a federal crime? And if so, what level of federal crime? Like a class
Oh,
C or
yeah. And so like typically seeds are they're very light. And so as a result, um, eh, eh, it's not salacious, right? Now, the way that they'll probably enforce seeds is you'll get debanked. Like your credit card processor will be shut down. You'll be kicked out of your bank. That is not the federal government enforcing, that's banking and payment processors saying, look, they would come after us, and so we're just going to kick you out and not do it. And so that's very similar to how it is in banking and cannabis. Like you have to get a compliant bank, but that compliant bank is difficult to find and expensive, and also, and it makes no sense, but even because it's a Schedule One substance, it's the only Schedule One
right.
substance that has like federal policy and how to compliantly launder the money. Because like any cannabis deposits from a licensed operator is technically money laundering, but you can still get a bank provided that it is in compliance with the FinCEN guidance as to how to bank cannabis from 2014. Yeah.
I still am perplexed by this, and nobody has answered it, and I don't expect you to either. I'm just putting this out there. But the whole RICO statute, you're not able to take proceeds from an illegal activity, yet every cannabis producer, which is in violation of federal law, still has to pay their federal taxes on it. So they're collecting money from an illegal activity. Isn't that RICO? But that's more of a
It's
uh,
organized. And so, like, you have to have a group enterprise that they knowingly is doing something false or fraudulent, as a racket to generate cash. So, I don't think that there is that worry right now as the seeds are hemp. They
mm,
will not be hemp soon. But then you have a clone and a tissue culture loophole, because like the fruit of the poisonous tree really isn't like, or the source rule and hemp idea, the legality comes from. Uh, I don't think that applies. I think that applies to like the THC that's in it. So the THC is still legally hemp afterwards, but like the seed, even if it came from like that type of genetic that might have turned it into it, you look at the plain language of what the hemp definition is, and it doesn't say that. If they wanted to say that, they'd put that in there. So it just says THC level in the plant. But if and then they try to like prevent those genetics from getting anywhere by doing the seed, they really screwed up by not defining the genetic in the plant material itself. And so, like, they could
it'll
have, like, killed all the loopholes, but instead they just created a more upstream loophole that I don't think anybody will really complain about, because I don't think really a lot of people are complaining about the seeds. I think some people are, otherwise they wouldn't have banned them. But it's really the unfettered just dealing of weed that's going
right.
on in
Yeah.
gas stations throughout the United States.
Right, that's definitely the biggest problem, and it'll be interesting for me to see, what sort of penalty that they would put on this. Again, you mentioned the weight of seeds. Are they going to do it by weight? I know with plants, even if the plant is this big, there's still a mandatory minimum yield per plant that they charge you by. Doesn't matter if it's a 25 pounder or a 2 incher, you get the same amount of weight per plant. That'll be interesting. Makes me wonder though, because we have these state legal programs which kind of supersede it. So do you think interstate sales will be banned, or is that going to be left up to certain states?
That's like the only point that really has a lot of the the supremacy clause or like the preemption doctrine in the hemp. You cannot get in the way of interstate commerce in what is considered hemp, but your state can restrict what they consider hemp more stringently. So, like a state could adopt, and some states have adopted, a here are the genetics that we consider to be hemp, like, California, New Jersey, they have a list of seeds. Some states don't, and that's where the genetic loophole could continue, but the seed loophole won't continue. If you're selling clones or if you're selling tissue cultures, then you get very difficult aspects when it gets to how do you ship to particular areas. Some companies will probably just put like buyer beware. That's when you might get, some the attorney general in one state trying to like work with the attorney general in another state to shut you down. But that's too speculative and too far
Mm,
into the future for that to happen. That you're going to see, because right now you go online and buy clones,
yeah,
and that definition is the same. And like so, like right now, it's just the plant. It's so they didn't clean up that loophole. But then all the seed businesses, those ones they're going to have hard times, because when they ask about like the plant and at the time of the transfer of the plant, what's its THC content? Well, it's clear versus, well, those seeds they're in the exclusion. And it didn't say seeds, clones, tissue cultures, immature plants. It just said seeds.
yeah, yeah. And you keep mentioning, potential loopholes within this. Again, it's all about the language that is or isn't in there. And so you said there's no specific mentions of clones or tissue culture. I do want to point out for people watching, everything you send over a state line is supposed to have a phytosanitary certification in the first place. So that may be an issue where they could crack down on clones if they wanted to. But I saw an excellent video on the Cannabis Legal News channel, and you were talking about final product or ingredient, and the clones or the tissue culture really can't be defined as either or. So that
Right.
leaves them almost just unchallenged.
Right. So, but
Okay.
then well, that means that it's not in the exclusions of it. And so like they start excluding from the definition of hemp these intermediary or final products or the hemp derived cannabinoid products. Um, and then if you aren't in any of those buckets, you read back up to what the definition of hemp is. And again, it's the cannabis plant in any part of the plant. And so that clone's a part of a plant. It's cannabis plant. That's what it is. It's a little cannabis plant with roots. And does it have THC? No, it does not. And then same thing with a tissue culture, even smaller part of the plant. It doesn't even have roots yet. It's in like a petri dish, basically. But it's a vegetative aspect of the plant. And so does it say tissue culture or clone? No, it says the plant in any part of the plant. So just like they took the word derivative and then turned it into a soda or a gummy bear or like any product, provided that it's just sprinkle some hemp in it. It's a derivative. You have footing to argue that it is part of the plant and it's THC compliant.
Man, well, it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Again, Tom, I absolutely appreciate your time. Unfortunately, bearer of bad news, it sounds like seeds are no longer going to be what they are. And, even in this, quasi legal state, banking has always been an issue. I've had a number of credit card processors. So, yes, that's usually the first and easiest route. I guess, and you are giving us some hope with maybe the clones, maybe the tissue culture. We'll see. But last question, I guess. When is this all scheduled to take effect? How long as a seed maker do I have to go through inventory?
Well, it depends at the federal and the state level. Some states are getting theirs in line with what the federal definition will be as of November 12th. and some are making their operational deadlines prior to that. Banking, they don't. Banking doesn't turn on a dime, and so banking usually has regulators, and regulators, look for liability. And if those banks have cannabis or hemp clients, they'll probably have some due diligence that'll start, in the summer, as they get ready to look to Q4 in November. Like, are we banking compliant hemp or are we banking marijuana? Because we have to file something with the FinCEN if we're banking marijuana, and then they would kick you out of your bank. They will probably tell you, and hopefully they'll tell you before they kick you out of your bank, but sometimes banks just kick you out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Well, again, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. Please, for years, you have been my go-to expert when it comes to cannabis legal news. So can you please let people know who are watching today where they can find you, what's going
Sure.
on, so they can learn more?
Yeah, just go over to your YouTube search bar. It's Cannabis Legalization News, CLN. You'll see us, and go to check out our videos, watch them, give them thumbs up, subscribe. You'll be you'll be very upset about the hemp
Yes.
changes, and then you'll be very upset about how much inaction there is. If I would have thought that I'd be doing this podcast, we entered our 7th year of doing it. No federal change.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some things do
Except for
change.
hemp.
And I
Yeah.
apologize for saying cannabis legal news because it's
Yeah, it's close enough.
legalization. I always do
Right.
that. But you know what? It shows me that I'm still young at heart because I'm still young enough to not want to say the whole word. I
Yeah.
abbreviated it. So,
Yep.
cannabis legalization news, guys. Check it out.
Right.
Tom, thank you very much, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for
So
having me.
long.
See you later.